Hello and welcome to the Answers Yes podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Hey, if you didn't notice all the posts I've been pushing out lately, the book is out, The Freedom to Say Yes. Thank you for your support. That was a 10-year goal of mine to get that book out, and it's finally there. Now I'm going to have to find the next thing on my list to check off. Actually, that's the oldest thing on my list of goals, so I don't know where we go from there. Something fun for sure. Well, today I've got Amy Anderson on from Wild Coffee Marketing. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Jim. I'm great,
I
thanks.
love seeing the sunshine coming into your room via Zoom here because I've got snowy weather outside. So thank you for sharing your sunshine.
Absolutely. Life in the tropics ain't so bad.
Nothing wrong with that. Hey,
Nope.
I love the company that you are a part of and what you're doing. And I'm always curious how you got there. And if you've listened to some of my shows, you know I'm going to ask you about your background. So can you walk us through some of the early years of Amy Anderson?
Absolutely. Well, I've always seen myself as a bit of a conformist,
Mm-hmm.
right? I always followed the rules in school. I got out of college in 4 years because my dad said 4 years, no summer school, no grad school will I pay for. And the day you graduate, that is it.
Mm.
I'm not paying for anything. So I went to Chapel Hill and I had a job at 17 magazine in New York City the day I graduated.
Wow, good for you.
Skipped graduation. They actually thought I didn't graduate, but instead, and they kept my diploma when it came. They felt very relieved and they were like, oh, this is our receipt for
Oh,
4 years of college that
oh,
we paid for you. But knew I wanted to live in New York, and I got into the media business, sort of by accident. And I was a corporate person for 25 years.
mm,
I hear a lot of people talking about the side hustle and selling. You mentioned one of your podcasts, like, selling gum on the playground. Somebody else talked about selling lemons on the side of the road.
yeah.
I was a corporate person for my
Okay.
entire career. So I started in print at 17 magazine. I loved the environment. It was the 90210 days and
Yeah.
having celebrities in and really sort of learning the ropes and marketing promotion there. And then it just didn't make sense to me because I said, how do they know that this is successful for their advertisers?
Mm-hmm.
You have readers per copy and a subscription rate. And I ended up actually doing broadcast for Calvin Klein.
Oh,
So I was doing all of their radio and all of their television for the fragrances. That made more sense, right? We have Nielsen ratings, it's a little bit more detailed. And then the internet came about. So
mm-hmm.
yes, this is my 30th year working. I'm finally owning it. I graduated in 92, but the internet came about and they called it new media.
Yeah.
And I headed up this new media division and decided I wanted to get into pure.com and ended up at the New York Times as part of the original group that launched mytimes.com.
Mm.
So I was in the media business, loving New York, and then finally ended up sort of on the business to business marketing side with software, IP telephony, and financial services. But all of that was in a corporate framework. I felt safe. I knew how to advance. I got along with people. I worked really, really hard. It was probably hard for people to find someone who didn't work harder than I did.
Sure.
And then I took a few years off. I had two young boys who are now teenagers. And I stayed home for a few years. And then our family changed and I had to go back to work.
Mm.
So that's where I got sort of to this crossroads where, well, I have a 25-year marketing career. If I go take a CMO or VP role, I'm never going to see these little boys
Yeah.
and they need me. And I wanted that flexibility. And this was in 14, 15. And so my parents actually said, we'd like to invest in you.
Hmm. Okay.
You've
Love
exceeded
that.
our expectations through a lot of your life, and we'll pay your expenses because I really didn't have anything at that point,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can try this consulting thing that you're curious about. And that's where I started small. I took whatever I could get. I was working with wedding planners, restaurants, doing PR, strategy, and then joined forces with somebody who hired me in 2004. And we had been working together off and on, stayed in touch, and that's when we formed Wild Coffee.
Hmm.
So we're client side marketers. We're not agency people. And so we're using that client side mentality and that sort of approach to marketing in an outsourced consulting format. And that's what we've done in the last 5 years.
Okay. I want to talk about Wild Coffee, but let's talk about your past a little bit because I spent a number of years marketing a brand in New York City, which was Kettle One Vodka. I was the vice president of marketing at the time. And the time frame that you're talking about working there, it was such a significant place in marketing and branding and what was happening. You very casually walked through that career, but I know that was not without getting some scrapes and bruises. What was it like being in your role at the time, and also as a woman amongst these powerhouses in New York City?
Right. Well, the 90s had no rules
Mm-hmm.
in New York, right?
Yeah.
So, when we talk about building culture and leadership and how I treat my team and my clients, it was not that way back then.
Yeah.
It was like sort of risky times
Mm-hmm.
as a woman
Yeah.
too. I think it was a time where things all of a sudden became accelerated. Right. So I go from this sort of, 17 magazine, established brand, and then the internet's coming. I'm in this pure.com play where we're in series A, series B, raising funds. We didn't even have money for pencils. We were so crammed in an office at a company called iVillage, where I worked for 3 years
Yeah.
as the director of promotion, that we had to ask the person next to us to please scoot over so we could get our chair out.
Yeah.
But I loved it. I mean, talk about sort of an incubator of all the skills that you have to develop during that time when it's highly accelerated. There's a lot of pressure to succeed because you're watching your peers do it in the .com world, right? So it's the first time, I think about it now when we talk about taglines with brands. I think that's where they started to become irrelevant, because with the internet, it's just moving so fast and evolving so quickly, even starting then, that you can't just put a stake in the ground and say, this is who we are.
Right.
I think you have to constantly be looking at it and evolving it. And even, now is lightning speed for that, right?
Yeah, well, and we were evolving so fast then, just the way we were marketing our brands. What caught somebody's attention one day was different the next. I mean, even when you look at bars and restaurants in Manhattan, late 90s, early 2000s, opening, closing, this is hot, this is cold, nightclubs, boom, boom, boom. And of course, the brands are following the pathway of where everybody's going and the trends. I could only imagine trying to keep up with that and be successful within that. It must have been very challenging.
While creating the business model.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So the New York Times was one of the first media companies that required registration in order to view the content. And think about that. Then, while the newspaper is very threatened by this small organization thinking we're going to cannibalize the paper. And look how long it took really for that. And then the New York Times is thriving now, because they've gotten into media businesses and really sort of grown through this. But it's just so much tension all the time. And the pace was great, but I don't think there was any better training in my career to be working with those big brands all the way through the 90s. Everything else has sort of felt like cakes and stuff.
You had to have some serious grit back in the day to survive. Not to mention, I think in the late 90s, the crime rate was pretty high in Manhattan. Of course, that smoothed out in the early 2000s. But not only did you have to survive on the way to work, but you have to survive at work with competitors.
Well, I was saying that to someone the other day. Now we're all working from home in our offices. And I'm thinking, I used to have to take 2 different subways just to get to my office by 8:30. And I felt like I had accomplished something huge and my day hadn't even started.
Just to get to work every day.
Yes.
My daughter asked me on the way to school this morning, we love to talk and dream and stuff like that. Beautiful sunrise today. And she says, Daddy, have you ever been to New York? And I said, yeah, I have. And she goes, well, how many times? A couple? I said, maybe a couple hundred at least. I was going a couple times a month back in the day. And she goes, oh my gosh, was it amazing? Absolutely was amazing. Do you miss the big city? I mean, you're down in Florida now in a quiet little sleepy town. And, do you miss the city and the jam and go?
So much. And it's funny. I told somebody the other day that had I not had children, I would have stayed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would still be working potentially at a big brand. Maybe I would have a firm like I do now.
Yeah.
But yes, just the vibrance of it, the variety of it, the diversity of it, and now, yes, I'm in a sleepy-ish sort of Florida town. I was in Miami for 17 years. So that's that helped me sort of transition to where I am now. It would, I think, been too sudden. At least there, I learned to speak Spanish in those 17 years. I learned about so many different cultures and countries. And I think as a marketer, to be so open all the time and to expose ourselves to different people and scenarios really sort of help the creativity keep going.
Yeah. Let me ask you something, because I'm curious about this. Let's dive into some marketing discussions now. When you think back to what marketing was, we're talking about Manhattan, and of course there's other great cities like Los Angeles and Frisco that had great marketing groups of people that, converged down into Silicon and what was happening in LA as always. Do you think we'll be able to capture that again now that we're so spread out amongst the internet and in our homes and on these Zoom calls? I mean, do you think we're going to find that energy and that liveliness somewhere where we can come together at?
Such a good question. I was thinking about that the other day. Is our collaboration on Zoom true collaboration? And
Hmm.
can you feel the energy of your team or the people around you on this little tiny real estate on the screen? And I hope we get back to something like that. We're all so distributed. Speaking of New York, everyone lives down here now.
Yeah, of
They've all
course they do.
left. We're all here.
Wow, imagine that.
Yeah, driven real estate prices through the roof, and but there's also brings a vibrance, to Florida as well. But I wonder, Jim, because and I do think that there's something that we lose by not being in person.
Hmm.
I miss my team. We have a concentration of employees in Southeast Florida. We're all trying to get together next week. I mean, I miss them. I miss sitting across the room from them. I wish I could walk into their office, but we've run this company on Zoom for 4 years. We're used to it, but you have to really make an effort to collaborate. Sometimes it's 5 o'clock and say, hey, you want to grab a glass of wine and come back?
Yeah.
Can we have a drink and sort of go through this? And, really to understand and know them and really create those collaborative environments is important.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I haven't discussed this too often, but I think about it a lot. I just started a new business and my partner says, hey, we should look at office space. And I went, okay, I kind of like where I'm at. I like my view for sure. I get to see my kids throughout the day, but I do miss that office environment and that collaboration. I mean, we've always joked about the water cooler or the coffee room, but that's where conversations happen, real touch points happen that we're missing. I'm a person of faith and we raise our kids going to church. We can do church on Sundays at home, but there's nothing like going to the service and being around other people. So I'm a little bit fearful of where we go with this thing, in the near
Yeah,
future.
I hear you absolutely. And also the isolation,
Hmm.
right? I mean, we have to really consider that and what the person on the other side of the Zoom is experiencing. We have shared office space in a couple locations, and then we were so excited to offer it to the team, and then they really didn't want to use it.
Yeah.
And I get it. They're like, why would I leave the comfort of my home office and go drive somewhere? But in the beginning, Jim, that's how we were able to recruit some pretty spectacular employees because it was before COVID. And they had a new baby at home. And an agency where my creative director worked made her work, 9 to 6.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't even do 10 to 7.
Yeah. Wow.
And now that's sort of out the window. What do you need to be successful in your job? And how can I help develop that and support that for you?
Well, maybe as marketers, we throw out a challenge to come together once in a while. Maybe they're group think tanks in major cities or not so major cities where we can get together and collaborate and touch one another physically so that we can have a dose of reality. It's interesting. I've been in the alcohol spirits industry the last 25 years. And what we've seen as far as trends, and the easy example is Smirnoff vodka is very domestic. It's very black and white. And there's been this trend to authentic brand story products. And you look at Tito's and what they've done in the marketplace, what he's done. I mean, he's a real person with a real soul and really works the brand. And we all crave that authenticity versus that black and white, virtual type brand. And maybe we'll see this happen in all of our genres and things that we do as we crave that authenticity once again.
Yes, we've talked about that a lot lately. If you're not authentic, you're not genuine, and you haven't sort of gone and sort of had your own unique story and ripped the veneer off of a brand that's trying to be something maybe it's not,
Yeah.
everyone knows now.
Yeah.
We've seen each other at our best and worst. And, the whole we're in it together lasted about 5 days, right? Just to show you how quickly things
Hmm.
move and how things can become corny and sort of outdated so quickly.
Yeah.
If you didn't sort of move with that. But, we're not even selling anymore. I mean, I think that there's this sort of relaxed